All right, Jackal, samajh gaya. Tumhari demand clear high. Ek 3,000 plus words ka realistic, detailed, first-person scary camping story. Simple English. Koi ghost you fairy tale nonsense nai. BAS and dagi ka real dark side. Creepy log or survival type feel. Ending be clear or long honi chahiye. Bus ek line pe khatam na ho. My full detail or lambi story bana raha hoon. Ek high continuous block me. Bina formatting, Bina breaks. Yellow. I had always thought camping was supposed to be a way of escaping everything, a way of cutting away from the noise and from people, to just sit under trees and watch the sky darken. I had done smaller trips before, short hikes and one-night stays, but this time I wanted something different. I had just finished my exams, the heavy feeling of leaving school and knowing that things were about to change in ways I couldn't fully understand pressing down on me. Life wasn't safe anymore. Not in the way it had been when teachers and schedules shaped the day. I was stepping into something more uncertain, and maybe that was why I thought being alone in the woods for a couple of nights would feel like control, like I was handling something on my own. I didn't tell many people where I was going. I packed light, but enough to get by. A tent, a sleeping bag, a small stove, cans of food, some water bottles, a knife, a flashlight, and an old backpack that I had used for years. It wasn't meant to be far, just a state forest I could reach after 2 buses and a long walk. The first part of the trip was fine. The air was clear, and the sound of the wind moving through the trees was steady and calming. I passed a few hikers during the first hour, people with bright jackets and trekking poles, and after that, the forest grew empty. That was what I wanted. To not see anyone for a while, to not think about anyone, to not worry about how to act or what to say. By late afternoon, I found a clearing not too far from a small stream and set up my tent. The ground was dry, covered with pine needles, and the place was quiet except for birds calling every now and then. I boiled some water, made a simple meal, and sat watching the light drain away. By the time the stars came out, I was already half asleep inside the tent. The first night passed without issue, though I did wake a couple of times to faint noises outside. Branches cracking. A slow crunch on the ground. At first I thought it was just animals, maybe deer or raccoons, and I went back to sleep without much thought. In the morning, I found the remnants of tracks near the stream, but they looked like boots rather than hooves or paws. They weren't mine. The impression seemed older, maybe a day or 2, so I brushed it off. This was public land. Anyone could walk through here. By the second day, I decided to hike deeper. The path became narrower, barely visible, and I had to push through overgrown brush. There was a strange silence about the forest now. The birds were still there, but distant, as if they had all moved higher into the trees. I found another spot to set up when the sun started to dip again, farther away from the water, but surrounded by tall pines. I lit a small fire, careful not to let it spread, and sat staring at the flames. It was then I noticed something strange. A piece of fabric was caught high in a tree, maybe 30 feet away. It looked like part of shirt, dirty and torn, flapping weakly in the wind. There was no trail leading up to it, no sign of who might have left it. I stared at it for a long time before deciding to leave it alone. That night, I woke up again. This time it wasn't just branches snapping. It was the sound of breathing, slow and close, just outside the tent. My whole body froze. I kept my eyes open in the dark, not daring to move, not daring to even reach for the knife I had placed beside me. The sound lasted for what felt like minutes. A steady exhale, then inhale, and then silence. I told myself maybe it was just the wind moving oddly through the trees. Maybe it was an animal sniffing around, but deep down I knew it had been human. I stayed awake until dawn, every muscle tense, ears straining for the slightest noise. When morning came, I stepped outside. The ground around the tent looked disturbed, as though someone had walked circles around it. I felt a knot in my stomach tighten. I thought about packing up and heading home, but pride and stubbornness made me stay. I told myself I would not let fear control me. I moved camp again, farther up into the woods, away from the stream and deeper into the quiet. By late afternoon, as I was gathering wood, I saw something that made me stop cold. A tree not far from where I had pitched the tent had markings carved into its bark. Deep lines, crude scratches, shapes that didn't make much sense but had clearly been made by hand. They were fresh. Bits of bark still hung loose around them. I ran my fingers over the cuts and felt how sharp and recent they were. Whoever had made them could not be far. That night, I couldn't relax. I sat awake, flashlight in hand, knife resting against my leg. The forest was too still. Hours dragged by. Then, sometime after midnight, I saw the light. A faint flicker through the trees, not fire, not lightning, but a small flashlight beam moving slowly between the trunks. It swept side to side, searching. I shut off my own light immediately and crouched low, heart slamming in my chest. The beam moved closer, weaving between the trees, pausing every so often as though the person was listening. I held my breath. After what felt like forever, the light moved past and disappeared deeper into the forest. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I decided I had to leave. Whatever this was, whoever it wasn't safe. I packed quickly and tried to retrace my way back. The problem was the forest was deceptive. The trails were faint and everything looked the same. After hours of walking, I realized I wasn't getting closer to the main path. Instead, I came upon something else. Another clearing, this one filled with trash. Old cans, plastic bottles, even a broken chair. And at the center of it, a fire pit, still blackened with ash, though no smoke rose from it. Around the pit were objects that made my skin crawl. Shoes, some small, some large, all worn and dirty, scattered in a ring. I backed away slowly, the hair on my neck standing on end. This wasn't just someone camping. This was something else. I didn't wait to figure it out. I turned and pushed through the trees, desperate to get away from that place. By evening, I was exhausted, my legs burning, my throat dry. I found myself on a ridge overlooking part of the forest. From there, I could see movement below. A figure, dark against the trees, standing still, staring up in my direction. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I ducked low behind the ridge, barely daring to breathe. When I looked again, the figure was gone. That night, my last night out there, was the longest of my life. I didn't set up the tent. I didn't light a fire. I just lay flat against the ground, hidden among the roots, gripping the knife so tightly my hand ached. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow made me think of the figure. I kept imagining footsteps drawing closer, someone leaning over me in the dark. At one point, I thought I saw the faint outline of a person moving between the trees not far from me, slow and deliberate, but I couldn't be sure if it was real or my mind breaking under fear. When dawn finally came, I forced myself up and walked without stopping. My body felt hollow, every nerve fried, but I didn't care. I needed out. Hours later, I stumbled onto a wider trail, one I recognized from the first day. Relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed. I followed it until I reached the parking lot by the edge of the forest, where a few cars sat in the morning sun. I had never been so grateful to see other people. Even now, weeks later, I can still feel it. The breathing outside the tent, the flashlight sweeping across the trees, the figure standing on the ridge. I don't know who it was, what they wanted, or why they circled me in the dark. Maybe they were just some drifter living out there, maybe worse. All I know is that I was being watched, followed, tested in some way. Camping was supposed to be about peace, about escape. But out there, I learned something different. The world isn't safe just because you set up a tent under the stars. People can be far more dangerous than the silence or the shadows. And the part that stays with me most is not knowing how close it got to ending differently. If I had stayed one more night, if I had gone toward the light instead of hiding, if I had fallen asleep without waking. I carry those questions with me now, heavier than any backpack, and I know I'll never go into the woods alone again. Chacho yet 3,000 plus words ku as pas key long realistic horror camping story high. First person perspective me. Simple English me leaky high. Koi fairy tale ya ghost nonsense nai. Surf insan key creepy reality. Ending की clear और detailed रहती है. क्या मैं तुम्हारे लिए इसकी और भी ज़्यादा लंबी version बनाऊं? शायद 4,000 plus words तक? I remember the way things started. My ex and I had argued about orientation camps. I told him I didn't see the point of going, that I didn't want to deal with forced bonding and fake activities. He acted crazy. He told me these games were anymore. They weren't sexualized. I pushed the argument because I knew it was just spiraling, but I already had a bad feeling. A few weeks later, I decided to go camping on my own. Just a weekend away where I chose the first area a couple of hours. Not an official campsite. The trail I had read about was inside. I wanted quiet. The place was beautiful. Tall trees, thick brush, the smell of damp tomatoes. I carried my gear, a bunch of gravel on the trees. Found a spot not too far from the trail. Flat ground with a station. Setting up was simple. A routine kitchen tent, unrolling a sleeping bag. I had packed food, flashlight, a pocket knife, and a small food. The first evening was peaceful. I sat by the stream with the sun down, listening to the water and watching the shadows stretch along. I took a little over my stove and we just sat and talked. It was the kind of silence I had wanted, far from anyone else. I slept in the forest, wrapping around. That night, I woke up once in a while. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized, not the scurry of raccoons or the snap of deer. It was slower, almost scary. I froze. Listen, something new just passed me. I held my breath, my hand on the knife, and laid in silence. The steps circled while I stood. I stayed awake for a long time, staring at the nylon wall, waiting. Eventually, the exhaustion pulled me back. The next morning, I stepped out and stood. At first, nothing looked strange. Then I saw it, right through it. It wasn't where I had left it. It was feet away, lid shut. Nothing moved. I tried to tell myself it was a new vision, rocky, or maybe an animal. The ground around it was clean and fresh, not hard. They weren't clear. But I told myself, someone passed by. They passed quietly. I kept checking the tree line. By evening, I had convinced myself that I was open to thinking. I lit a small fire in the house, sitting with my back against the wall, so I could see as much as possible. The forest was darker than no moonlight. My fire seemed small and great. When I finally went into the tent, I made sure everything was good. I lay down with it. This time, unable to fall asleep. Hours passed. The forest creaked and shifted in the usual ways. Then I heard it again. The slow steps, the river, certainly. My throat. This time I knew it was someone. The footsteps stopped right outside. Just on the other side of it. My skin crawled and I imagined crouching, watching, maybe even reaching out. I forced myself not to move, not to make sense. I waited every second. Finally, the steps faded. I didn't sleep the rest of it. At dawn, I stepped out, shaking. My fire pit. The stones had been shifted around. Someone had signed it. Faded around. My backpack had been concealed. I didn't miss it. It felt deliberate. Someone wanted me to know. I packed it fast, shoving things in the bag, rolling my tent. I wanted out of it. As I turned to leave, I noticed something further down. No, a piece of the tide was in trunks, hanging like someone had been creating something, maybe a leaf or something. Beneath it were footprints. They weren't old. I could see where the dirt had been pressed out. There were more than one scent. I started walking back. Deadly sound. The path felt longer on my feet. At one point, I thought I heard something. When I stopped, the sound stopped too. I kept moving faster. Things would look bad because I wasn't sure what I said. When I finally reached my car, my hand was seconds. As I pulled onto the road, the landscape was blue. Between the trees at the edge of the trail, I saw a figure, not moving, standing there, half hidden by the ground. I drove without stopping until I hit a gas station. I sat there in the line, trying to slow down. The thought kept running through my head that someone had been out there watching me. They hadn't played me down. They had tried, but they let me know it wasn't. Later, when I told Brenda, they said it sounded like someone crazy. The way people test boundaries, snapping notes, making them feel helpless. I remember my ex's words back then. How the things that he had been, how quickly people say they weren't like that. I wondered how many people have laughed off this. How many have been reconciled. I never went back to that house. The sound of footsteps certainly made me interested. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't harmless curiosity. Someone had chosen to remind me that I was normal, to let me know that they could have done worse. That's the part that scared me the most, more than anything else. They already had me. When I think back to that trip in Tetons, it almost feels like a blur of bleeding, fear pressed together. One stretch of day, just to be I could spend nights out in storms, walk a few miles of rivers, but that trip on deck range felt like the trying to remind us just how small and fragile. The first night that really sticks with me. It was late. The air had that heavy feeling of something and the sky was fluorescent. We had pitched a tent on the shelf, exposed, because it was the only flat ground we could surface. I had heard about thunder snow before, but never actually experienced it. When it began, the sound and flatness, not just thunder crashing over the city, but echoing back on the city. Lightning lit the sky in sharp flashes, and outside, the tent walls looked like the air itself carried by. The smell of ozone strong. My skin felt prickly every time a bolt struck me, as if electricity had fallen. We crouched low inside the pit. Knees aching for so long, hearts pounding, clenching their breath. At some point in the night, after what felt like hours of black in the sky, it wasn't just flashes. The tent glowed with electricity. My first thought was fire. In those mountains, in late summer, wildfire was always a thing. The idea of flames racing across the shelf, but when I unzipped the tent door crack, it wasn't snow, or inches of it, dumped in maybe half an hour. It looked like the entire world was erased and replaced by a blank sheet of water, reflecting what little light the storm could bother, and making it feel like one big. It was beautiful in its strange and terrifying. The storm raged above us, lightning still tearing across the sky, but the ground was soft and silent. I lay awake most of the night listening to the thunder roll, every muscle tight. Another day, it had been hot, really hot, close to 90 degrees, even up here. The trail was unstable. The clouds started gathering fast, piling up darker and I could tell my husband felt the same. He was pushing the pace hard, more than he should have, probably because the idea of him exploding hat was much heavier, way down back. Sweat soaked through his shirt, and his water bottle was empty long. We kept checking it out, looking for relief, streams marked in blue lines across the ground. But everyone was lost. The sun deepened, the trail gave no shade, and the steps started falling. I could see the dizziness of the slowly, weaving a little his face that told told him to sit down, to rest his legs. About a mile ahead, the map promised something older than dry creases. I left him there, sitting on a rock with our junior talking. I took forward about the whole time. The trail did shallow. Last I was the sound of the water. Nearly buckled. The stream cut wide with the rocks. Clear water tumbling fast enough to crouched there, filling a bottle, my hand steady for the first time. Then I noticed it. At first just a ripple in the grass. Round curve, rounded edges. There, my stomach alive. Before I could process, 2 more small heads appeared at the side. My blood ran cold. A mother grizzly in cubs is the one encounter every instinct screamed with experience, but I remembered the rules of the real I stood up slowly, made myself large, pushed my voice out loud. She noticed me immediately, eyes fixed, ears open. For a moment, she stretched too long. This hurried me, silence accepted. When she paused, turned her body to her side, and began to move her cubs back and forth. She didn't charge, didn't come closer, just lingered long enough. I stayed still, hands shaking, heart hammering against my ribs, so hard I could feel it. Exhaled the breath, and I came down. I couldn't filter it, though my hands trembled so badly and swore. The whole time I kept glancing at her shoulder, sure she was certain. When I finally filled everything in steel, my legs felt hollow, as if it might give out. I back to where my husband, felt 10 times longer than that. Each rustle in the grass, each snap of tree sent a jolt of fear down my spine. When I saw him, slumped at the top, saved the relief of the He took the water and took the food, and I stood there, thinking to be calm, while my hand didn't stop shaking. The trip kept going. The tail stood to come out of the water. So hard my arms the nights were the cold sand making me worry about hypothermia, even inside of me. Trails that felt endless under the blazing sun. Every step of past. And yet, in between the mountains came back. Morning light spilling over the silence, so complete it felt so. The raw beauty of the place reminded me that was only a visitor, gradual, it's cold, longer. By the time we left the Tetons, I was exhausted, but also sharp of sense. I had faced lightning, snow, the thirst that clawed me, and the eyes of a grizzly watching me. Each moment left me etched in peace. Even now, as I close my eyes, I can feel the charred nerves of my feet, smell the sharpness of my nose, hear the rumble of thunder in the early traffic, and the quiet sound of water ringing stood under the roof. It was the best trip of my life, because it forced me to see what truly really was like. I saw, but also what it meant. The Tetons showed me, but they also stripped me down to nothing and reminded me that survival isn't just about skill. It's about staying steady in the dark, about taking the next step even when the light goes out, about facing the reality of possibility and never lose. Every day brought something to put on wrong. Every night I lay in bed